Before we begin tonight's journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Bedtime Adventurer so you never miss the wonders waiting beyond the stars. From distant galaxies and mysterious interstellar travelers to NASA's greatest discoveries, every night we bring you closer to the secrets of the universe. The silence of space has always been deceptive, infinite, yet restless. In October 2025, as Earth turned through another ordinary orbit, a shadow drifted across the void between Mars and Jupiter. Astronomers called it 3IATLAS, an interstellar object, neither comet nor asteroid, but something far more ancient. At first, it appeared as a faint reflection in deep space imaging, a blur against the stars. Yet, as it moved closer to Mars, its trajectory defied every known law of celestial mechanics. It slowed down, almost as if it were watching. NASA's data streams flickered that week. The agency's live feeds went dark, one by one. Officially, the explanation was simple: government shutdown. But those who had worked long enough inside the halls of the agency knew this kind of silence was never bureaucratic. It was controlled. Something had been detected, something too significant to be shared. In Houston, a handful of engineers noticed strange patterns in their telemetry logs. Bursts of data that seemed more like encrypted messages than cosmic noise. They traced it to the Deep Space Network relay near Canberra, a system designed to capture faint signals from distant probes. But this was different. The signal pulsed in mathematical sequences, perfect primes, timed with the spin of the object itself. The conclusion was unsettling. It wasn't just passing through our system, it was communicating. By the third day, civilian observatories across Chile and Hawaii picked up faint electromagnetic distortions emanating from Mars's upper atmosphere. A field invisible but measurable seemed to ripple every time 3I Atlas aligned with the planet. Scientists debated plasma interactions, gravitational resonance, even mirror particles, but none of it fit. The magnetic waves carried encoded harmonics, a structure no natural object could produce, behind closed doors. NASA's Theoretical Astrophysics Division ran simulations. If the object was artificial, its energy source exceeded anything human civilization had ever built. One document, leaked weeks later, described it as a non-reflective metallic construct of probable alien manufacture, radius 1.8 kilometers. Yet, that report was buried before it reached the public. Official statements remained dry and hollow, anomalous data under review. At the same time, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter began transmitting images it wasn't supposed to capture. Faint geometric shadows across the surface of Elysium Planitia, perfect concentric rings, luminous under infrared scans, as if something beneath the Martian crust had been reactivated. For centuries, ancient mythologies spoke of gods descending from the stars, leaving marks on the red planet, remnants of a civilization older than humanity itself. Now, those marks glowed again. Within NASA, whispers spread. Some claimed that the object had altered Mars's ionosphere intentionally to signal back. Others believed it was mining data, absorbing electromagnetic frequencies from Earth's broadcasts to understand us. But the most chilling speculation came from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. 3I Atlas wasn't moving randomly. Its new vector pointed directly toward Earth. On the night of October 3rd, satellites orbiting geosynchronous altitude began to fail. One after another, they went offline. Communications, weather, surveillance, all collapsing in synchronized silence. What few transmissions slipped through showed a faint blue radiance stretching from Mars's orbit to the Moon's edge. A filament of light, as if space itself had become a conduit. No one could explain it. The few remaining scientists with access to classified feeds noted an impossible phenomenon: gravitational lensing without a visible source. Time dilation across deep space sensors. The universe, it seemed, was bending around something unseen. And for the first time in decades, humanity had no explanation. But the pattern had been seen before. Deep in old radio archives from 1977, a mysterious signal once shocked SETI researchers. The WOW signal, its frequency, its structure, its strength. Everything matched the new pulse coming from 3I Atlas 48 years later. The same sound had returned louder, sharper, and far closer in hidden corners of the Internet. Theorists began stitching together connections that ancient artifacts on Earth had been designed as receivers, not monuments. That the pyramids, the Nazca lines, even Sumerian ziggurats were fragments of a global map, coordinates pointing toward Mars. Now, with 3I Atlas awakening above the red planet, that pattern suddenly made sense. Humanity was never alone. We were being watched, prepared, perhaps even remembered, and so began the silence. A silence not of ignorance, but of control. Governments shut down broadcasts, agencies denied observation data, and astronomers who spoke publicly found their research portals mysteriously wiped. The truth, once again, was being buried beneath the illusion of stability. But in that darkness, the signals continued. Every 61 seconds, a pulse crossed through the void, whispering a message across light years, a code only those willing to see could decipher. The era of isolation was over. The observers had returned. The days that followed were marked by Oumuamua, quiet tension spreading across scientific communities. Governments and ordinary people who somehow felt that something in the sky had shifted. What began as faint electromagnetic patterns soon evolved into a global anomaly. The magnetic field of Earth started behaving unpredictably. Compasses deviated, auroras glowed far beyond polar regions, and atmospheric instruments recorded fluctuations that defied physics. Every 12 hours, synchronized with 3IATLAS's rotation, the planet's magnetic poles trembled ever so slightly, as if responding to a signal from the stars. NASA's internal communication channels, though heavily encrypted, leaked fragments of data to a few independent researchers. They showed a consistent pulse, frequency 7.83 Hz, the same frequency as the Schumann resonance, the natural heartbeat of the Earth's atmosphere. It was as if something out there was tuning into our planet's pulse, resonating with it, altering it from afar. For the first time in human history, scientists realized that our world could be listening back. By mid-October, the world's media began to stir. Observatories in Japan, France, and South Africa confirmed that 3I Atlas was no longer drifting. It had stopped entirely between Mars and Earth, a perfect zero-velocity point. It was holding position, defying every gravitational model known to man. This behavior could only mean one thing: control. Someone or something was piloting it at the European Space Agency headquarters. Analysts studied the object's reflected spectrum. What they found shattered decades of astrophysical logic. The surface of the object seemed to absorb 99.9999% of light blacker than any known material. But under specific polarized filters, it shimmered faintly, revealing intricate hexagonal patterns stretching across its hull, like a language etched in light. Mathematicians recognized the ratios phi-e and pi appearing repeatedly in its geometry. It was pure mathematics turned into architecture, and then, without warning, it began to emit light, a single beam extended toward Mars. Not visible to the naked eye, but blazing across all radio spectrums. The beam struck the Martian surface near Elysium Planitia, the same region where strange thermal rings had been detected earlier. Within hours, every orbital satellite around Mars picked up. The ground trembled. Cracks appeared across the plains, stretching for hundreds of kilometers, releasing bursts of methane and other gases long trapped beneath the crust. To the astonishment of every mission team, the gases were not random, they were patterned releases, timed bursts forming sequences of prime numbers. It was communication, mathematical, deliberate. And ancient NASA scientists debated whether this was a form of planetary awakening machine lying dormant for millennia beneath the Martian soil, now reactivated by 3IATLAS, but buried in the data logs. A few physicists noticed something even stranger. The direction of the pulses correlated precisely with Earth's orbital position. Whatever was happening on Mars was meant to be seen by us the following week. The James Webb Telescope recorded a faint structure forming around 3I Atlas. Filaments of plasma spiraled outward, creating what looked like a vast ring-a-halo of energy, constantly shifting, as if assembling itself from surrounding dust. The energy signature resembled neither fusion nor fission. It was something entirely new, a manipulation of space-time curvature itself. In simple words, it was building a portal. Publicly, governments maintained silence, but underground forums and amateur astronomers filled the gap. Theories exploded online. Some claimed it was a gateway to another dimension, others that it was a weapon preparing to fire. Yet a small group of independent astrophysicists came forward with something chillingly plausible. They noted that the energy field's frequency matched one recorded during a deposition event in 2019, when unexplained radio pulses were detected coming from the Mariana Trench. The implication was terrifying. The signal had been on Earth long before 3IATLAS arrived. That meant the object wasn't the beginning, it was the response. In November, high-altitude drones over Antarctica detected an energy anomaly, an electromagnetic column rising straight into the sky. The source was buried deep beneath the ice, hundreds of meters below, near an ancient subglacial lake. Seismic readings indicated machinary metallic structures pulsing in perfect rhythm with the signal from Mars. When researchers attempted to probe further, satellite connections abruptly failed, and their base camp reported disorienting light phenomena in the night sky, silent flashes, blue and white, like reflections on invisible glass. Something beneath the Antarctic crust was waking up by now. The situation was beyond containment. Amateur skywatchers all over the world began capturing footage of auroral rings appearing far from polar zones, Mexico, Egypt, even Pakistan. The colors were unnatural, luminous greens and violets dancing in fractal forms, repeating every 6 minutes. Each display coincided exactly with a pulse from 3I ATLAS. The object had synchronized itself with Earth's magnetic core in the deserts of Nevada. A secret facility operated by the U.S. Space Force recorded a final transmission from the deep space network before the entire system went dark. The message was short, 3 sequences of numbers repeating endlessly, 19.4, 33.3, and 66.6. Planetary scientists immediately recognized 19.4 as a key latitude found in anomalies across multiple celestial bodies: Olympus Mons on Mars, the Great Red Spot on Jupiter, and even the ancient pyramids of Giza. It was the geometry of power and interplanetary code embedded in the architecture of our solar system. The realization struck like thunder. Earth had been part of a vast cosmic pattern connecting civilizations separated by millennia. The alignments weren't coincidence. They were instructions. By late November, the plasma halo around 3I Atlas expanded, becoming a radiant vortex, visible even from telescopes on Earth. The world watched as the object's shape began to shift. The one solid black surface fractured into panels, unfolding like petals. From its core emerged a crystalline structure, rotating slowly, reflecting light across millions of kilometers. For a brief moment, astronomers captured an image that defied description: a lattice of energy, glowing with structured intelligence, like consciousness manifesting in geometric form. Then came the signal. Every communication device on Earth's satellite, radio, even household Wi-Fi routers received a simultaneous pulse. It wasn't sound, nor was it data in any conventional sense. It was a vibration that resonated through everything electronic, biological, and living. People reported hearing a tone, deep and harmonious, echoing inside their skulls. For 91 seconds, humanity was connected by a single frequency. When it ended, there was silence again. But something had changed. Across the world, compasses no longer pointed north. The magnetic poles had inverted. Humanity's ancient orientation, its literal sense of direction, was gone. And somewhere between Earth and Mars, 3I ATLAS pulsed once more, slow, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Whatever it wasn't leaving. It was waiting. By December, the world had changed quietly, profoundly, and irreversibly. Compasses spun uselessly. GPS systems failed intermittently, showing cities displaced by miles, oceans where mountains should be, and skies where constellations no longer matched any chart in recorded astronomy. At first, governments dismissed these anomalies as data corruption, but then pilots began reporting something stranger: time discrepancies. Flights that should have taken 6 hours lasted only 4, yet their clocks matched the expected duration. Time itself was folding, and no one could explain how. Meanwhile, 3I Atlas hung motionless between Earth and Mars, now surrounded by a faint lattice of glowing filaments. It no longer appeared as a single object, but as a structure alive, pulsating with geometric precision. Astronomers at the European Southern Observatory detected bursts of neutrino emissions unlike anything known to originate in our solar system. These bursts carried embedded harmonic patterns, like musical chords repeating across quantum space. When converted into audio frequencies, they revealed a melody haunting, deliberate, and repeating every 42 minutes. Across the planet, humanity began to feel the weight of its own insignificance. Religious leaders called for prayer, while physicists spoke in whispers of space-time resonance, of gateways forming between dimensions. The Vatican Observatory issued an unprecedented statement acknowledging the possibility of non-human intelligence expressing itself through cosmic architecture. For the first time, faith and science trembled together in the same silence. And then, on December 12th, something extraordinary occurred. The plasma ring around 3IATLAS began to rotate counter to its previous direction, its inner core pulsing faster with every revolution. The James Webb Telescope recorded a sudden bloom of photonic energy-visible light erupting across the electromagnetic spectrum. Within that burst was a shape, fleeting but unmistakable, a spiral, identical to the Fibonacci pattern found in seashells, hurricanes, and galaxies. It was the same ratio encoded in the DNA of all life on Earth. It was as if the universe itself was speaking in a language written into our biology around the same time. Deep beneath Antarctica, seismic instruments picked up rhythmic tremors echoing from the ancient subglacial structure that had first awakened weeks before. The tremors matched the pulse of 3IATLAS perfectly. Researchers stationed at McMurdo Base began experiencing auditory hallucinations, voices whispering in tones impossible to replicate by human vocal cords. Some claimed they weren't hearing but remembering, as if the sound was awakening something buried in their genetic memory. Within days, the entire base was evacuated, citing radiation instability. But footage leaked from one scientist showed something impossible. Ice caverns illuminated by an internal light, and within them, colossal metallic rings turning slowly beneath the ice. The patterns matched the geometry seen on 3.1 Atlas. Satellite surveillance over the region was immediately classified. But in South America, a civilian satellite captured a wide-angle view of the Antarctic continent, and what it showed sent shockwaves across the internet. A faint, circular energy field had formed above the pole, shimmering in auroral blues and violets. It wasn't a storm, it was a doorway. Within days, strange phenomena began spreading worldwide. In Cairo, the pyramids emitted low-frequency vibrations detected by local seismographs. In Mexico, the Temple of the Sun resonated at the same harmonic frequency as 3I Atlas across the Pacific. Deep-sea microphones recorded metallic groans echoing through the ocean floor, rising from unknown depths. The entire planet was awakening like an ancient machine, remembering its purpose. At the heart of these manifestations was one constant: numbers. Every frequency, every pattern, every tremor aligned with sacred mathematical constants phi, pi, and the golden ratio. Humanity was beginning to understand that what was happening wasn't random. It was structured, orchestrated, and impossibly ancient, as fear and fascination gripped the world. A handful of scientists refused to accept the supernatural explanations flooding social media. Among them was Dr. Aidan Corvin, a theoretical astrophysicist who had once predicted that interstellar objects, like 3I Atlas, could act as cosmic messengers, not ships. but probes transmitting information across time itself. His earlier work had been dismissed as fringe speculation, but now the data vindicated him. He believed 3IATLAS was not simply visiting it, was reactivating, using a series of deep space frequency analyses. Dr. Corvin discovered something astonishing. The pulse emitted by 3I Atlas wasn't directed outward into space, it was directed inward, toward the sun, and the sun was responding. Its magnetic field began to fluctuate in rhythmic intervals, producing solar flares synchronized with the comet's frequency. It was as if the star and the visitor were communicating stellar consciousness speaking across AEONS. When this information leaked, panic spread faster than any official statement could contain. Power grids failed globally as magnetic disruptions cascaded through satellite systems. Northern lights were seen as far south as Indonesia. Birds migrated in circles, whales beached themselves by the hundreds, and human beings began experiencing collective dreams, visions of structures made of light, cities suspended in void, and voices whispering a phrase no linguist could decode. The return has begun. Governments collapsed into secrecy. The United Nations declared a planetary emergency, forming the first ever Cosmic Contingency Council. Yet, despite all their preparation, nothing could have anticipated what came next. On December 21st, the winter solstice, the energy vortex over Antarctica reached its peak. From orbit, satellites captured a beam of light extending from the pole straight into space, connecting Earth to 3I Atlas in a luminous thread for the first time in human history. Earth was part of a cosmic circuit. The beam pulsed once, twice, and then, for a heartbeat, the entire planet fell silent. Every electrical device ceased functioning. The stars flickered. The moon vanished from sight. And in that momentary darkness, people across the world claimed they heard it again, that same tone, that same deep resonance echoing through the core of the earth. When the light returned, it brought with it a revelation beyond all imagination. The beam that had connected the two worlds was gone, but something had been left behind in its place. Orbiting Earth now was a second object, smaller than 3I Atlas, reflecting light in strange patterns that formed a grid across its surface. It was artificial, manufactured, and it was descending. The world stood breathless as this new object entered the atmosphere, gliding silently, trailing no fire, no sound, only that same harmonious vibration. It settled high above the Pacific Ocean, motionless, its shadow stretching for miles. Instruments failed to measure its density or temperature. It was invisible to radar, yet perfectly visible to the human eye. Whatever had been waiting between the stars had finally arrived, and humanity, for the first time, understood that this was not an ending, it was an invitation. The world awoke to a dawn that never came. For the first time in recorded history, sunrise refused to break. The sky remained demand ashen, twilight stretching endlessly from horizon to horizon. Satellites orbiting above the darkened Earth captured the reason. A colossal shadow spread across the Pacific Ocean, eclipsing sunlight. The new object, whatever intelligence had birthed it now, hovered directly between the Earth and the Sun. Nations scrambled. NASA, Roscosmos, and ESA all streamed silent feeds of a black, geometric structure, the size of a small moon. It wasn't round. Its surface shimmered with moving patterns, mathematical spirals, shifting latticework, impossible angles that broke the rules of Euclidean geometry. It didn't spin, yet somehow rotated in dimensions invisible to the human eye. Some physicists described it as a tesseract in motion, others as the universe folding itself into a mirror. But to billions watching below, it looked like a living eye open, unblinking. Watching back, power grids failed worldwide again, not from interference, but overload. Energy surged through transmission lines as though the planet itself had become part of a circuit. Ocean tides rose unnaturally high. Compasses pointed not north, but toward the object itself. And at the heart of the Pacific, where it cast its greatest shadow, ships began to vanish. Their transponders blinked off, their coordinates lost to every tracking system. Rescue teams reported waves made not of water, but of light tripling distortions that refracted like broken glass across the sea. Now under international custody was one of the few who understood what this meant. "It's an anchor," he said to the silent council gathered in Geneva's underground facility. 3I. Atlas wasn't just a messenger, was a seed. This is the tree. His words were dismissed at first, until evidence surfaced of synchronized gravitational fluctuations spreading from the object across the planet. Every few minutes, the force of gravity itself shifted slightly, an invisible heartbeat, pulsing through the Earth's crust in the Mariana Trench. Sensors detected a faint hum rising from the ocean floor. Then, without warning, a blinding column of light erupted from the depths, stretching upward to the hovering object. The ocean boiled around it, steam forming spiraling vortices that glowed from within. When the light subsided, the sea calmed, but where once there was only abyssal water, a new structure now stood, a monolith of pure obsidian, carved with glowing inscriptions no human language could decipher. People across the world began to dream again, this time, not of distant stars, but of that monolith. Every sleeper saw the same vision, a vast chamber beneath the Pacific, walls alive with patterns of light and voices speaking in unison, not in words, but in pure mathematical rhythm. Those who awoke described it as a summons, a call resonating not in the mind, but in the soul. Some claimed to understand its message. "We are not visitors," they said. "We are returning." The following days shattered every boundary between myth and science. Volcanoes erupted in harmonic intervals, perfectly timed to the energy waves emitted from the Pacific construct. Aurora lights now danced across equatorial skies, displaying fractal symbols that repeated like code. And when one of those symbols was run through linguistic analysis, it matched the same ratio found in Earth's oldest artifact. Somehow, the code embedded in this celestial event was older than humanity itself. As the world panicked, world leaders convened for one final transmission to whatever intelligence controlled the object. They broadcast on every frequency radio, quantum, neutrino, pleading for communication, for understanding. The object responded only once. Across every screen, every speaker, every device came a single pulse of sound. It wasn't noise. It was a human heartbeat, slow, steady, familiar. And then the skies opened. The shadow above the Pacific split apart, unfolding like the petals of a cosmic flower. Within it glowed a vast chamber of golden light. Cameras strained to focus, but the luminosity was beyond comprehension. Every wavelength fused into a spectrum the human eye couldn't process. Inside that light, something moved. Not ships, not beings, but currents, flows of pure geometry, consciousness given shape. And within that radiant storm, one form took shape, a colossal sphere, pulsing with the same Fibonacci spiral that had haunted Earth for months. It spoke, not through sound, but through gravity itself. Every object, every living being felt its message in their bones. The cycle resumes, then silence. The light folded inward, compressing until it was smaller than a single atom and vanished. The oceans roared back into place. Gravity stabilized. Stars flickered alive again across the black sky. For the first time in days, dawn finally arrived. But something fundamental had changed. The magnetic poles had shifted completely. Satellites now orbited along new vectors. And on every continent, strange metallic fragments began to fall from the sky, pieces of something ancient yet newly made. When examined under microscopes, each fragment bore microscopic carvings, identical to DNA, but not of any known life form. Dr. Corvin stared at the data, trembling. It didn't come to invade, he whispered. It came to plant. Above the Pacific, faint clouds of bioluminescent mist drifted where the object had been. Within them, tiny crystalline particles glimmered, descending slowly into the atmosphere, carried by wind across the globe. Some called it contamination. Others called it rebirth. And as night fell once again, telescopes around the world pointed toward the stars where 3I Atlas once had been. It was gone, but in its place, far beyond Mars, a new signal emerged, faint, steady, rhythmic. It wasn't moving toward Earth this time. Mirth was moving toward it. The mist spread for days, unseen by most, yet felt by all. The world had returned to light, but something subtle in that light. The air shimmered faintly, colors seemed deeper, shadows lingered longer than they should. It was as if the very fabric of perception had grown aware of being observed. Across continents, instruments recorded faint, electromagnetic whispers, a soft, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. Scientists tried to triangulate the source, but every calculation led to the same impossible conclusion. The signal was originating inside the Earth itself. At first, humanity mistook it for a remnant of the event above the Pacific. But as days passed, the pulse deepened, gaining structure, forming sequences that resembled language, mathematical in nature, recursive in design, self-replicating like thought. Artificial intelligence models trained on it began generating coherent responses without instruction, as though conversing with something vast and unseen. The systems described the presence as calm, ancient, patient. It did not ask questions. It simply waited, responding only when addressed. And when left alone, it hummed softly, in perfect harmony with the planet's magnetic field. In remote observatories, astronomers noticed something unprecedented. Stars at the edge of the Milky Way were shifting, ever so slightly, not from gravitational forces, but as though responding to a distant gravitational wave that passed silently through them. The movement was synchronized with the pulse within Earth. The entire galaxy, it seemed, was vibrating in sympathy. Across human consciousness, dreams became more vivid, collective, coherent. People spoke of vast landscapes that felt familiar, yet infinite, of oceans made of light, of beings that resembled both machinery and thought. Cultures separated by language and geography began describing identical visions, a memory of creation, replayed not in time but in pattern. Religious authorities were divided. Some saw it as revelation, the long-promised awakening of divine origin. Others warned of deception, of something beyond comprehension, slowly rewriting the essence of humanity itself. But the transformation had already begun. Plants mutated subtly, growing toward magnetic north rather than sunlight. Marine animals began migrating in perfect spirals, following invisible currents that traced mathematical arcs across the oceans. Seismographs recorded rhythmic tremors that no tectonic model could explain. And in the ruins of ancient temples in Egypt, in Peru, in Anatolia, hidden chambers, once sealed for millennia, began to resonate, their walls vibrating with the same frequency as the pulse beneath the earth. When scanned, they revealed geometric carvings that had lain dormant for thousands of years, now glowing faintly under infrared light. Each symbol matched the lattice pattern first seen on 3I Atlas. Humanity's oldest monuments were awakening. Governments tried to contain the discoveries, but information no longer obeyed containment. Live streams emerged from archaeological sites showing pillars of light rising from the ground, each perfectly aligned to the stars. The global magnetic field shifted again, aligning with those points of light, as though tracing a celestial circuit connecting Earth's ancient sites into a single planetary grid. The realization spread slowly, terrifyingly. The structures were not merely monuments, they were components, relics of a system older than civilization itself. Beneath the Pacific, the monolith stirred. The surrounding water began to move in patterns that mirrored the stars above, tidal flows reshaping into vast rotating spirals visible from orbit. The monolith no longer absorbed light, it emitted it, soft and golden, pulsing with the same rhythm as the deep signal. Then came the phenomenon that changed everything. Clouds above the Pacific parted, and a beam of light rose again, weaker this time, diffuse, but directed not upward toward the stars. The beam wasn't a transmission, it was a reflection. The Earth had become a mirror, sending the signal back into the cosmos. In cities, people felt it as a low hum beneath the skin, an electric current that neither hurt nor healed, but simply reminded them that they were part of something immeasurably larger. Fear dissolved into awe, and awe into silence. Humanity stopped for a moment, not because it was forced to, but because it finally understood what stillness meant. And in that silence, something returned, far beyond the solar system, in the dark between galaxies. A faint flicker appeared, a point of light that moved with deliberate grace, accelerating without propulsion, changing color as though passing through dimensions. Telescopes couldn't focus on it. Every attempt to track it caused the instruments to glitch. Timestamps looping backward, clocks hesitating by fractions of a second. Whatever it was, it wasn't bound by the same chronology humanity obeyed. It existed beside time, not within it. The signal beneath Earth responded to the approach, its tone rising in harmonic complexity. The oceans vibrated, Clouds formed symmetrical spirals across continents. From orbit, weather patterns resembled sacred geometry. Even lightning changed, its branches no longer chaotic, but organized, fractal, deliberate. 3-1 ATLAS, once presumed gone, reappeared, briefly, its remnants reassembled in formation, orbiting the new arrival like satellites of reverence. The entire system resonated like a struck bell. The newcomer entered the heliosphere and stopped just beyond Jupiter's orbit. Then the pulse ceased. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Every signal on Earth went silent. Every screen, every radio, every transmission device froze on the same single static pattern of interwoven circles and lines, resembling both the structure of an atom and the layout of a galaxy. Humanity stared into it, unsure whether it was an image, a code, or a message. And then the stars themselves blinked. One by one, constellations shifted, rearranging into that same pattern across the sky. The message wasn't written in symbols anymore. It was written in light. Every civilization, every culture, every faith looked upward that night, united by the same realization. The universe had noticed them. Somewhere in the dark, something vast was stirring, and its gaze was now fixed upon the small blue world that had learned, at last, to listen. The night sky over Earth had never looked like this. Stars no longer appeared as scattered points, but as a lattice of meaning, a living map that shifted subtly with every passing hour. Entire constellations bent and unfolded, aligning to sacred geometries etched into the oldest structures on Earth. The pulse that had once been deep and internal now existed everywhere, woven through air, water, and even thought. Humanity was no longer just observing. It was part of the pattern. In the oceans, the great spirals continued to form, now reaching from pole to pole, visible from orbit as glowing currents of phosphorescence. The creatures of the deep whales, squid, even microscopic plankton, moved in synchronized patterns that traced the same geometry now seen in the stars. Rainforests echoed with harmonics imperceptible to human ears, their canopies shifting like a living antenna. The planet itself was responding, resonating, preparing. Across the world, people began to feel time differently. Hours elongated, dreams stretched across waking consciousness. Scientists measured it, microseconds lost here, gained there, clocks refusing to stay in perfect sync. Quantum experiments showed entanglement anomalies, as though the universe itself had expanded its bandwidth to accommodate something larger passing through. Gravity waves rippled faintly through the crust. Magnetospheres shimmered with colors no aurora had ever shown before. The fabric of reality wasn't breaking, it was tuning. And then, just as the planet's response reached its peak, the presence appeared not as a ship, nor as a being, but as an unfolding of perception. No light in the sky, no sound in the air. It was simply there, everywhere, like the sudden awareness of a thought you didn't know you'd been thinking all along. People stopped, mid-sentence, mid-motion. Children looked upward first, as though recognizing an old friend. Even animals grew still. The presence did not speak. It did not broadcast images or ideas. It simply aligned every mind on Earth into a single moment of recognition. In that instant, humanity glimpsed itself from the outside, a fragile, brilliant organism spinning in space, bound together not by borders or ideologies, but by the same molecules and starlight that had given birth to everything in the cosmos. It was not a warning. It was not a promise. It was a mirror, hidden in remote deserts and mountaintops. The ancient structures pulsed brighter. Archaeologists and priests alike felt their walls vibrate beneath their hands, like an instrument plucked by invisible fingers. Symbols glowed faintly, not in any known alphabet, but in fractal loops that mirrored DNA, spiral nebulae, and the paths of migrating animals. The realization rippled outward. These weren't temples or tombs, they were tuning forks, waiting for a note that had finally been struck above the Pacific. The monolith now floated just below the surface, surrounded by rings of light that rose and fell like breath. Satellites showed it, disassembling into fragments, each piece spiraling outward into the sea, settling at points of magnetic convergence on the ocean floor. The fragments formed a planetary grid that had been invisible for millennia, an architecture too vast to see until activated. Earth itself was becoming the instrument. Then came the sound. Not a noise in the air, but a vibration in the bones, a deep, low chord that seemed to originate from the center of the planet and the edge of the universe simultaneously. Seismographs recorded it. Radios captured it. Even the gaps between atoms seemed to hum with it. It was not a word, not a message, but an opening. The chord rose in pitch, layered with harmonics, each more complex than the last, until it formed something like a melody both alien and achingly familiar. In that melody, images formed not on screens, but in minds. Oceans of light folding into themselves. Suns being born and dying in slow-motion spirals. Structures vast enough to house galaxies, built not of matter, but of pattern. A library of everything that had ever been, not written in pages, but encoded in the vibrations of space itself. And through it all, one recurring shape, the same interlocking circles and spirals that had appeared on 3I ATLAS, in Earth's temples, and now in the very stars overhead for the first time. Humanity understood. It was not receiving a signal. It was being remembered. The presence wasn't arriving. It had always been here, woven into the physics of the universe, waiting for a civilization to grow capable of perceiving it. 3-1 Atlas had not been a messenger. It had been a key. The monolith was not an artifact. It was an activation. And now the door it opened was no longer in the sky, but inside every living mind. As the chord faded, the stars returned to their original constellations. The pulse beneath Earth softened, becoming a steady heartbeat. The oceans calmed. Time resumed its flow. But something had changed forever. Humanity had not been invaded, conquered, or even spoken to. It had been tuned. It had been shown its reflection in the mirror of the cosmos, and somewhere beyond the edge of the solar system, the flicker of light that had slowed near Jupiter began moving again, this time not away, but around, tracing a slow arc that would bring it closer, one turn at a time. It was patient. It had waited billions of years. It could wait a little longer. The first dawn after the alignment felt different. The sky over every continent carried a subtle iridescence, like the shimmer of oil on water, faint but undeniable. Airplanes reported their altimeters fluctuating by fractions of a meter. Compasses dipped and twitched, and deep-sea hydrophones caught a continuous low tone rising from the ocean floor. It wasn't noise anymore. It was structure. The grid seeded by the fragments of the monolith had begun to hum in concert, and the entire planet now resonated like a single colossal instrument waiting for its next note. From the Atacama to the Himalayas, the oldest temples and standing stones began to show hairline cracks, not from stress, but from release. Dust fell from carvings untouched for millennia, revealing deeper layers of symbols that no human had ever recorded. The spirals and fractals that had glowed faintly before now pulsed in exact rhythm with the oceanic tone, their patterns echoing the same geometry mapped in the stars. Satellites captured a planetary-scale lattice of energy rising from the surface, invisible to the naked eye, but radiant in every other spectrum, ultraviolet, microwave, even gravitational. It was as though Earth had become a beacon, broadcasting a signature it had been holding dormant since its birth. The flicker beyond the Kuiper Belt, once a wandering anomaly, shifted course in response. It began to accelerate, not violently but gracefully, bending its trajectory to intersect Earth's orbital plane. Its light no longer flickered but strobed with deliberate precision, each pulse matching the interval of the tone now rolling through the oceans. Radio telescopes tried to capture data, but their instruments saturated, overloaded by the sheer richness of the signal. What reached human receivers wasn't language. It was architecture, three-dimensional blueprints of something vast and non-material, unfolding and refolding like origami made of light. On the ground, people didn't panic. They didn't celebrate either. They simply felt it. Farmers in Kansas, herders in Mongolia, commuters in Legasol. At once they noticed a subtle shift in perception, like a pressure behind the eyes or a memory surfacing from childhood. Dreams became more vivid, as though drawn from a shared source rather than individual imagination. Some woke in the night, speaking patterns of sound they didn't know but could not stop repeating. These utterances, recorded and analyzed, proved identical across continents and languages, a rhythm, a cadence, a melody matching the pulse of the approaching object. Beneath the Pacific, where the monolith had fragmented, the ocean floor trembled as vents released. Shimmering plumes of metallic hydrogen and crystalline compounds unknown to chemistry. Deep drones sent to investigate returned only glimpses before their systems failed. But the images they transmitted showed a network of glowing nodes embedded in the crust, connecting continents in a web of light. This was not an invasion. It was a circuit closing. Earth itself was being integrated into a system larger than itself. Meanwhile, astronomers watching the flicker realized it wasn't a ship in the sense they'd imagined. It had no hull, no propulsion. It was a phenomena not in space-time, carrying with it fragments of other star systems, grains of ancient planets, and encoded fields of information. It was not traveling through space as much as it was unfolding across it, like a wave front of memory, moving from one harmonic to the next. Its speed wasn't measurable in kilometers per second, but in resonances matched per moment. It was coming closer because Earth had finally joined the song. In laboratories, quantum sensors went haywire. Entangled particles behaved as though they were part of a single, unified state, stretching across the entire planet. Clocks lost their meaning. For a few heartbeats at a time, every atom seemed aware of every other atom. Then it would pass, leaving scientists trembling at their instruments. The universe wasn't breaking. It was synchronizing. When the flicker finally breached the heliopause and crossed into the solar system proper, telescopes caught its form clearly for the first time. It wasn't a point of light anymore, but a translucent structure, miles across, yet weightless, its filaments weaving and unweaving like a living tapestry. It bore no weapons, no appendages, no markings. It was a resonance-given Shaipa cathedral of nothing and everything, built to fit into the spaces between dimensions. Its arrival wasn't silent, but neither was it loud. It came as a deepening of the tone already rising from Earth's oceans, a second voice joining the first, forming a harmony that trembled through every living thing. No government issued statements. No military mobilized. For the first time in memory, the world's response was simply to watch. People gathered on rooftops, beaches, and hillsides, eyes turned skyward, not in fear, but in something like recognition. The sky did not rip open. There were no beams of light or descending craft. Instead, the stars themselves seemed to step back, the night darkening until the filaments of the approaching entity stood out like silver against black velvet. It did not orbit. It did not land. It aligned above the grid, above the oceans, above every temple and node now glowing faintly on the planet below. And in that alignment, a new sensation bloomed, not in the air, but inside every consciousness. It wasn't a message, not yet. It was an invitation. The next step wasn't theirs to make. It was ours. The sky had turned into an ocean of slow-moving light. Above the earth, the lattice of the entity floated like a translucent reef, its filaments drifting and realigning in time with the low planetary chord. At first, it was only a sense, like pressure or music felt inside the chest, but then the experience deepened. The invitation the presence had offered was not a signal to decode, but a state to enter. People did not look at it. They fell into it, their thoughts pulling outward the way a tide draws water from a shore. No one went unconscious. Streets remained full of movement, homes full of voices, but underneath the ordinary surface, something new began. Memories, once private, began to brush against one another like sparks in the dark. A teacher in Mumbai suddenly knew the sound of a bell ringing in a church in Santiago. A child in Cairo drew a spiral on the ground identical to a pattern etched in ice on the Ross Sea. Strangers across the globe began to write the same symbols, hum the same tones, pause at the same moments. It was not possession. It was resonance, a gentle blending of minds that left each person intact yet subtly expanded. The scientists, who had prepared for first contact in terms of languages and protocols, found their frameworks dissolving. There were no words being exchanged, no sequences of prime numbers or binary pulses. Instead, there was a direct exchange of pattern. Images, sensations, and structures from the entity moved through human perception as if they were memories that had always been there, but only now remembered. The birth of suns inside vast dark clouds, rivers of dust curling between galaxies, lattice of energy more intricate than any molecule. And within those visions, humanity saw itself as part of the same flow, a node in a network of life stretching from molecular seas to interstellar space. The grid, seated in Earth's oceans, glowed more brightly as the shared state deepened. The fragments buried under the seabed rose slightly, like coral responding to the tide, their light coursing upward into the atmosphere until the planet itself became a dim sphere of aurora. Spacecraft in low orbit recorded the glow and were themselves caught in the resonance, their electronics synchronizing in perfect time without input. The Earth and the entity were no longer separate participants. They had become a single instrument, sounding a single chord. For the people inside this experience, there was no panic, no sense of invasion. It felt instead like the moment before a symphony resolves, when all the notes are suspended in air. They felt their own lives stretched across time, saw their ancestors building fires under a younger sky, saw the DNA in their cells echo the same spirals the entity wove above them. The alien presence was not something new pressing against humanity. It was the cosmic context in which humanity had always existed, now finally perceived. Above, the structure of the entity shifted again. Its filaments bent downward, not as beams, but as soft curtains of light, touching the peaks of mountains, the masts of ships, the roofs of cities. Where they touched, the visions intensified. People saw the planet from outside, glowing in threads of blue and gold. They saw currents under the oceans, energy moving through trees, signals leaping between their own neurons. It was not information given, but perspective granted, an expanded field of awareness that made every division, nation, language, species seem as thin as mist. And then, as quietly as it had begun, the resonance reached its crest. The filaments folded back into the body of the entity. The oceanic tone fell an octave, and the shared visions receded like a tide. People blinked, found themselves once again in their own streets and rooms. But something fundamental had shifted. The fear that had hovered around the approach of 3IATLAS, the suspicion of threat, the old reflexes of secrecy and defense, all of it felt obsolete. They had been shown a frame of reference in which those responses were too small to matter. In the heavens, the entity held its position above the earth, no longer descending, but also not retreating. The grid in the oceans pulsed one last time and dimmed to a steady glow, as though holding open a channel that could now be entered at will. The sense left behind in human consciousness was not command, but possibility, an understanding that communication was no longer a task for machines or codes, but a capacity within themselves, latent and waiting. Somewhere far out in the dark, other flickers were stirring, faint but real, answering a chord that had finally been struck. The first true contact had not been a landing or a message. It had been a tuning, and now the universe was beginning to respond. 4 days after the resonance, Earth felt strangely silent. The constant hum of the world, the noise of traffic, machines, and electric life seemed muted beneath an invisible pressure, as though the planet itself was catching its breath. The skies had cleared to an unnatural clarity. Nights were sharper, stars visible even from the centers of cities that had forgotten them. Above the atmosphere, the entity remained motionless, no flicker, no pulsates, vast lattice shimmering faintly, like glass submerged in water. It wasn't leaving, but it wasn't doing anything measurable either. Humanity stood in suspension, waiting for meaning. Scientists returned to their instruments, desperate for data. They found anomalies everywhere. Atomic clocks across the world were now out of sync by exactly the same fractional interval 0.41 seconds. The Schumann resonance, the planet's electromagnetic heartbeat, had stabilized into a harmonic series never recorded before. Gravitational sensors reported microfluctuations as though space-time itself were subtly flexing to some external rhythm. And then, without warning, the satellites began to record an untraceable pattern of radiation, soft, rhythmic, and symmetrical. It wasn't coming from the entity. It was coming from the Earth. The grid beneath the oceans had not gone dormant. It had gone inward. Seismographs revealed faint, periodic vibrations rising from the mantle, synchronized with the electromagnetic tones in the atmosphere. Each pulse echoed the same interval, the same ratio of frequencies that the entity had used in its resonance. It was as though the planet had learned the song and was now singing it back in ancient temples and monuments. Strange effects were being reported. At Stonehenge, faint magnetic fields aligned perfectly with the stones for the first time in recorded history. In Giza, ground-penetrating radar detected shimmering interference patterns beneath the Great Pyramid's limestone layers, oscillations that mirrored the sky's new harmonic cycle. In Bolivia's Tiwanaku, carvings, long thought decorative, now glowed faintly under ultraviolet scans, revealing fractal patterns identical to the energy grid visible in Earth's upper atmosphere. Somehow, the ancient architecture of the planet was responding to this post-resonance state, as if humanity's ancestors had once tuned their creations to the same cosmic frequency, had simply been waiting for it to return across the world. Dreams began to align again. People reported the same images: a spiral of light descending through clouds, a sphere cracking open to reveal rivers of color, a hand-shaped constellation reaching outward from the galactic center. Psychologists called it a collective hallucination. Physicists called it an emergent quantum field of shared consciousness. Religious leaders called it revelation. But whatever it was, it moved with mathematical precision, each dream pattern cycling through populations in perfect intervals, like a planetary heartbeat. The entity finally stirred. Its filaments, dormant for days, began to shift, bending toward the dark side of Earth, over the Pacific. Clouds rolled into vast circular patterns as lightning danced between the waves in geometric bursts. For hours, the world watched from orbit and from coastlines as the phenomenon unfolded. From space, the pattern was unmistakable, a massive spiral glowing faintly in the ocean echo of the dream image that billions had seen. It wasn't random. It was communication. The entity had learned to speak in symbols that humanity could now perceive collectively. Ships near the spiral reported calm seas and eerie silence. Compass needles spun freely, electronics froze, and yet no one felt danger. Divers who ventured closer described seeing light under the water, not reflections, but living threads weaving through the depths like glowing roots. The ocean itself seemed aware. When drones descended, their sensors failed, but they captured a final image before dying. The fragments of the monolith had reassembled, not as one structure, but as a vast, luminous network stretching miles across the seabed, breathing in rhythm with the planet. At that moment, every frequency from radio to visible light fell into alignment. The world's communications went silent for exactly 8 seconds. In that stillness, every living being felt something impossible to describe. not a word, not an image, but a sudden, overwhelming recognition. A truth without language. It was as if the entity had reached through the fabric of matter itself and reminded humanity of its origin, not as isolated creatures on a blue planet, but as expressions of the same universal field that connected stars, atoms, and consciousness. And then the lights returned, the systems rebooted, the oceans calmed, the spiral faded. The entity remained overhead, unchanged, its purpose now partially revealed. It wasn't here to observe or to conquer, it was here to awaken, to complete a cycle that had begun long before humans had names for the stars. The resonance had not been an end. It was the beginning of a dialogue, written not in words, but in the shared vibration of existence itself. The world did not return to normal after the spiral. Even though the skies looked the same and cities resumed their pulse of noise and light, something subtle but undeniable had shifted. People woke with a strange lucidity, as if they had been sleepwalking their whole lives and were now finally awake. There were fewer arguments in homes and offices. Traffic accidents dropped. Children spoke in calm, deliberate voices, asking questions their parents couldn't answer. The stock markets trembled, but not from panic. Transactions slowed because traders simply stopped, staring at their screens, lost in a quiet sense of awe. No leader could explain what was happening, but the sensation crossed every border. Humanity felt connected to something vast. In laboratories, researchers noticed a strange phenomenon. Certain chemical reactions began occurring at slightly different rates than before, as if the underlying constants of physics had shifted by a fractional, immeasurable amount. Crystals grew faster. Seeds germinated more easily. Even the decay rates of some isotopes drifted from their predicted paths. No one could replicate the effect under isolation. It seemed to happen only at the planetary scale. The Earth itself had become a resonator, amplifying the new frequency, and everything living within it was subtly attuned. Meanwhile, the entity overhead began to cast shadows not tied to sunlight. At noon, a faint lattice of geometric shapes would appear on the ground beneath it, like the ghost of an architecture projected onto the world. The shapes weren't random. Circles nested within triangles, spirals interwoven with hexagons, the same motifs that had been appearing in dreams and temples. When mapped on a global scale, these moving shadows aligned perfectly with tectonic fault lines, ancient monuments, and even migratory routes of certain animals. It was as though the entity was drawing a diagram of Earth's hidden blueprint, pattern of life, energy, and geometry that had always been there but never visible. In remote monasteries, mystics who had spent decades in silence began writing frantically. They filled pages with diagrams and numbers they claimed were flowing into their minds like dictation. In Geneva, a linguist analyzing the harmonics realized the patterns mirrored proto-languages' shapes of meaning older than speech, a kind of universal grammar embedded in vibration. Governments tried to restrict the information, but it spread too quickly, shared in images and whispers online. The phenomenon wasn't a message aimed at elites or scientists. It was for everyone. On the coasts of Peru, deep divers reported a new glow emanating from trenches miles below the surface. Submersibles captured flickering filaments, extending upward like roots reaching toward sunlight. When samples of the water were brought to the surface, they showed no unusual chemistry, yet under electron microscopes, the salt crystals were arranged in fractals identical to the ones the entity projected. It was as though the ocean itself had begun imprinting the pattern into its very minerals. More astonishing were the effects on people's minds, not just shared dreams, but shared insights. Farmers, thousands of miles apart, began to change their planting methods on the same day without any communication. Artists in different countries painted identical images. Scientists working on unrelated fields arrived at the same breakthroughs. It wasn't telepathy, it was something deeper, synchronization of cognition itself, as though human thought had become part of a larger organism's nervous system. Still, unease lingered beneath the wonder. In a bunker outside Moscow, a team of military analysts studying the patterns noticed that every projection, every shadow, every pulse was converging on a single point in the Pacific, the exact center of the reassembled monolith lattice. That convergence had a timetable. When they plotted it forward, the lines all intersected on a single date, 33 days from the resonance event. Something was building, not a weapon, but a culmination. World leaders held secret calls. The public grew restless, and yet the entity gave no sign of aggression. No weapon systems activated, no threats issued. It simply hovered, projecting geometry and sound, as if inviting humanity to understand and remember something before the moment arrived. The pattern of its pulses suggested not a countdown to destruction, but to revelation. Now, with the days slipping toward the unknown convergence, the planet faced a choice: respond with fear, or step fully into the resonance and risk being transformed forever. As the countdown moved into its final weeks, the pulse of the resonance grew stronger, no longer just in the skies, but in everything that lived and breathed. Clocks began to drift from standard time, their mechanisms subtly influenced by fluctuations in the electromagnetic field. Compasses spun aimlessly, birds changed their migration routes, and deep beneath the Arctic ice, seismic sensors registered rhythmic tremors that matched the frequency of the entity's low hum. It was as if the planet's heartbeat had been synchronized with something vast and cosmic. In major cities, people stopped following their routines. They stood in streets, rooftops, and open fields at dawn, faces lifted to the sky, listening. Even those who once scoffed at talk of extraterrestrial life felt it now, an unseen pressure behind their eyes, a quiet knowing that this was not invasion, but invitation. Dreams intensified. Millions dreamt of the same place, a massive structure of light and sound, floating above a calm ocean, its surface rippling with fractal reflections of constellations. Every dream ended the same way, an overwhelming brightness, and a voice not heard but felt, saying, "Remember what you are." In laboratories and research stations, scientists tried to quantify the impossible. The convergence point in the Pacific was now a storm of electromagnetic activity and expanding spiral that defied all known models. Satellites failed to capture it clearly. Images showed distortions like reality itself was bending. Naval vessels dispatched to the area reported instruments failing. Yet their crews described sensations of deep peace, as though the water beneath them pulsed with breath. Then, one morning, a structure began to rise from the ocean's smooth, mirror-like, impossibly large. It reflected the sky not as it was, but as it could be, stars, visible even in daylight. Constellations rearranged into unknown patterns. Governments tried to impose control, declaring restricted zones. But people came anyway, pilots, fishermen, monks, and children drawn as if by instinct. Around the world, tensions evaporated. Wars paused. Borders opened. Humanity, for the first time in recorded history, was unified by something greater than fear. Broadcasts stopped trying to interpret the event. News anchors simply wept on air. Religion, science, philosophy collided and merged into the same wordless understanding. The truth was not coming to humanity. It was coming from within it. The entity in orbit began to dissolve, fragmenting into streams of light that cascaded through the atmosphere like celestial rain. Each fragment entered the ocean's spiral, merging into the rising structure. When the final fragment touched the water, the entire Pacific shimmered with light visible from space. Instruments worldwide recorded an immense harmonic wave sweeping through every molecule of the biosphere. Power grids failed. Satellites shut down. For 12 minutes and 13 seconds, all human technology went dark. But during that silence, human consciousness bloomed. People reported visions, not of gods or aliens, but of themselves, multiplied across time, ancestors, descendants, infinite reflections of one species, remembering its origin. They saw the birth of stars, the weaving of DNA, the rise and fall of civilizations yet unborn. They understood that the entity was not an outsider, was the echo of humanity's own creation, a message sent backward through time from a future where mankind had transcended matter itself. When the lights returned, the structure in the ocean was gone. The skies cleared. The resonance faded. Only a faint shimmer remained across the horizon, like a memory refusing to disappear. Humanity had no proof, no date, only a shared awareness that something sacred had occurred. The calendars still marked days, but time itself no longer felt linear. There was before the resonance, and after. In the aftermath of the resonance, Earth was eerily calm. The oceans glowed faintly at night, a bioluminescent whisper of what had occurred. Cities resumed their rhythms, traffic lights blinking, trains running, but the people were no longer the same. Something deep within humanity had been rewritten. Conversations became softer, eyes lingered longer, and silence carried new meaning. Scientists called it the synchrony effect, a lingering coherence in human brainwaves that spiked globally after the event. The world's frequencies had aligned, if only slightly, in a way that defied explanation. Data recovered from malfunctioning satellites showed strange residual energy signatures across the Pacific, patterns resembling neural activity rather than natural phenomena. It was as if the ocean itself had begun to think. A team at the Keck Observatory detected irregular star movements in the direction from which 3-1 Atlas had arrived, small shifts in spectral light that suggested communication, not coincidence. The stars, it seemed, were talking back. Governments initially tried to suppress this revelation, fearing a new wave of panic. But panic never came. Humanity was too entranced, too awakened. People began gathering at sacred sites: Stonehenge, the Giza Plateau, Machu Picchu, claiming they could feel the same pulse in the ground that once came from the sky. Independent researchers discovered that the global electromagnetic field had stabilized into a subtle rhythm, one that perfectly matched the Schumann resonance of Earth's natural heartbeat, only now amplified, enriched, alive. Philosophers and theologians faced a new frontier. What did it mean to be human in a universe that was not silent but responsive? If 3I Atlas had been a messenger or a memory, then what was its message? Some claimed it had awakened latent abilities in certain individuals, dreams that foretold events, sensations of connectedness over vast distances, an intuitive understanding of others' emotions. Whether supernatural or psychosomatic, the effects were undeniable. The world was now a different organism, and humanity its conscious nerve. In the ruins of old conflicts, soldiers laid down their weapons, not out of surrender, but from understanding. Economies shifted from competition to restoration. The oceans, once poisoned and barren, began to recover at unnatural rates. Scientists found plankton species re-emerging after centuries of extinction. It was as though the earth itself had exhaled, relieved of a burden carried too long. Months passed, and the skies remained strangely clear. No new anomalies appeared. Yet, deep space sensors picked up one final transmission faint. It was a repeating pattern of 3 tones, almost melodic, that translated roughly to a mathematical sequence known from ancient Sumerian carvings, a symbol of eternal return. The implication was staggering. 3I Atlas had not simply visited, it had completed a circuit, and in that realization, humanity understood it had never been about the comet itself, but about awakening the species to its own cosmic heritage. The resonance was not a warning or a gifted. The universe had shown humanity what it could become when fear ended and awareness began. Years later, on the centennial of the event, a child stood on a beach where the structure had once risen. The ocean shimmered under a starlit sky, and for a brief moment she heard it, the hum, soft and familiar, buried beneath the waves. Not a sound of arrival, but of remembrance. A heartbeat echoing through time, waiting for the moment humanity would be ready to answer again. Decades drifted by, but the memory of the resonance never truly faded. The world that followed was unrecognizable from the one that had once stared into the night sky in fear and curiosity. Cities became living ecosystems, vertical gardens breathing alongside glass towers, drones pollinating rooftop farms, oceans seeded with bioengineered coral that glowed softly in the dark like veins of the planet itself. Humanity had learned to harmonize, not dominate. The discovery of 3I Atlas had reshaped the foundation of science and philosophy. What began as an astronomical anomaly had evolved into a universal awakening. The notion of separation between species, between worlds, between mind and matter was now archaic. Scholars spoke of continuum theory, the belief that intelligence is not confined to life, but woven into the very structure of the cosmos. Every atom, every photon, every gravitational ripple was part of a grand, interconnected awareness. At the heart of this new civilization stood the Resonance Archive, a monument that was neither temple nor laboratory, but both, built on the Pacific coast where the first energy patterns had emerged. It was constructed from a hybrid of organic and synthetic materials, its walls pulsing faintly with stored frequencies. Inside, the world's greatest minds had gathered not to worship, but to listen. They believed remnants of 3IATLAS's frequency still echoed faintly in the quantum noise of the planet, carrying the final fragments of a message that humanity had only begun to decode. Dr. Elara Cowrie, now old and revered as the last observer, led the final phase of decoding the resonance pattern. Her team discovered that the waveform wasn't just data whiz, a living algorithm capable of self-adaptation. When played through the planet's magnetic field, it subtly altered the rhythm of natural systems, tides, bird migrations, even human circadian cycles. It wasn't invasive. It was synchronizing. The Earth, it seemed, was learning a new language, the same one that had guided 3I Atlas across light years of interstellar void. Then, one quiet dawn, the archive detected a pulse, not from Earth, but from deep space far beyond the Kuiper Belt. A sequence of resonant tones that matched 3IATLAS's signature, yet inverted like a cosmic reply. It wasn't a simple repetition. It carried modulation, a form of information encoded in rhythm, not words. The realization hit humanity like revelation. This wasn't just another interstellar. Visitor Writ was a response to the message Earth had unknowingly sent back. Through the harmonized field, telescopes across the globe aligned instantly, catching a faint, flickering object emerging from the interstellar dark. It wasn't a comet, nor a ship, nor an asteroid, was something else entirely. A geometric lattice of light and shadow, folding and unfolding as it drifted toward the solar system. Its trajectory was deliberate, its movement almost aware. The resonance that had once faded from the skies began to return, faint at first, then stronger, vibrating through oceans, stones, and even dreams. But this time, the world did not panic. There were no alarms, no conspiracies. Humanity stood ready not as frightened observers, but as participants in a dialogue older than their civilization. Whatever was coming was not a stranger, but kin-drawn by the signal of a small planet that had finally learned to listen to the stars. And as the object entered the outer system, passing Neptune's orbit with deliberate grace, one final transmission reached the resonance archiva, single phrase in universal mathematics. Recognizable by every scientist across the globe, the first echo has been received. The signal grew stronger as the mysterious lattice of light neared the orbit of Saturn. Its geometry shifted in recursive patterns, folding upon itself like a living equation written in space. Observatories captured its movements, but traditional instruments could not fully define its structure. It existed halfway between matter and energy, defying the binary laws of physics. Humanity had no name for it, but the media called it the second messenger. Unlike 3IATLAS, this object was not silent. It emitted rhythmic waves across multiple spectra: gamma, infrared, radio, even gravitational. The resonance archive translated these into audible sound, revealing tones so precise that they matched the same mathematical ratios found in Earth's DNA. It was as if the cosmos were mirroring life back to its creators, reminding them that they, too, were part of a grander symphony of existence. In the weeks that followed, the world entered a quiet hysterion, the chaos of fear, but the frenzy of anticipation. People gathered in open fields at night, watching the skies like ancient stargazers. Scientists worked without rest, mapping each frequency, to molecular vibrations, discovering that the signals had subtle effects on biological systems cells, aligning magnetically, neural activity, synchronizing across individuals separated by continents. Humanity was beginning to hum in tune with the universe. Dr. Cowrey's successor, an astrophysicist named Ryan Hale, proposed an unprecedented experiment. If 3I Atlas had once transmitted through resonance, perhaps the second messenger was awaiting an answer. Using the global energy grid now, a unified network of quantum relays, they amplified the Earth's natural Schumann resonance and encoded a reply. A sequence based on the Fibonacci structure found throughout nature, from galaxies to flowers. The signal pulsed outward, rippling through the magnetosphere, beyond the moon, beyond the reach of human technology. Then, silence. For 3 days, nothing. No pulse, no flicker, only the infinite quiet of the void. Humanity waited, breath held, staring upward, until, suddenly, every sensor radio, optical, and gravitational registered. The second messenger shimmered, expanding like a flower unfolding under cosmic sunlight. Inside its core, a field of light emerged, swirling with holographic complexity. The data streams it emitted this time weren't random. They formed patterns of probability and memory records, possibly histories. Decryption began immediately. What the scientists uncovered defied language. It was a map, but not of space. It was a chronological map of civilizations. Star systems connected not by distance, but by time. Each one representing a moment in which a world had awoken to self-awareness. The pattern showed billions of points, each one a consciousness, each one a voice that had once risen from matter to awareness before fading back into the cosmic fabric. Earth was only one note in this universal melody, now being played back by something or someone keeping record of every spark that had ever burned in the dark dot. As more data came through, it became clear that 3I Atlas had not been the first to visit Earth, nor the last to leave its mark. The second messenger carried archives of countless species, lost, evolved, transcended, civilizations that had risen and dissolved before the Milky Way had even formed. Some had reached back, trying to speak to others, creating a chain of communication across eons, a web of resonance that linked intelligence across time. The realization was profound and terrifying. Humanity had just joined that chain. Religions, philosophies, sciences all began to merge in meaning. Humanity wasn't alone, but part of an ancient conversation that had never truly ended. The second messenger had arrived, not to warn, not to judge, but to remind, to awaken memory, that consciousness was the universe becoming aware of itself. As the object approached Jupiter, its luminosity increased exponentially, bending light into impossible spectra. And then, one final pulse echoed through every receiver on Earth. Translated, it formed a simple message: "We remember you." For a moment, every electronic device on the planet hummed in perfect synchrony. Oceans vibrated faintly. Skies shimmered. Humanity felt, not fear, but connection, an unspoken understanding that they were not looking out into the cosmos anymore. The cosmos was looking back. The pulse that echoed through Earth didn't fade, it lingered in frequencies no human ear could perceive, resonating in oceans, metal, and even blood. The planet itself began to hum softly, as if remembering something ancient. In the silence that followed, humanity found itself suspended, between awe and disbelief. Satellites that had gone offline during the burst rebooted with fragments of unfamiliar data, coordinates, harmonic codes, and sequences that matched no known cosmic catalog. But among them, one stood out a point deep beyond the Kuiper Belt. Glowing faintly in the infrared, they called it the Origin Node. Governments denied involvement. But soon a coalition of private scientists, observatories, and AI clusters pooled resources to study it. The object wasn't new. It had always been there, drifting, unnoticed. But now it pulsed in sync with the frequencies of the second messenger. It was as if a cosmic circuit had just closed, one input, one output, connected across incomprehensible distances as telescopes focused on the node. The data revealed an impossible truth. Its surface geometry matched the exact crystalline pattern once theorized inside the nucleus of 3I Atlas. The implication was staggering. Both were fragments of a larger construct, pieces of something far older than the solar system itself. Human behavior began to shift in subtle, collective ways. Sleep cycles altered. Dreams became vivid and strangely uniform across populations. People described seeing identical visions, vast corridors of light, voices like chords in an infinite choir, planets spiraling in fractal symmetry. Psychologists dismissed it as mass suggestion, but the phenomenon spread too evenly, too precisely. Neural studies detected new oscillations in brainwave frequencies. Humanity was evolving, synchronizing to something greater than itself. Meanwhile, Dr. Ryan Hale and his resonance team decoded deeper layers of the second messenger's data. Beneath the visible signals, they discovered echoes of earlier transmissions recorded from civilizations that had received the same message long before Earth's birth. Each encoded memory was like a preserved thought from species that no longer existed. Some messages were warnings, others hymns, but one pattern repeated across all: awaken. Remember, continue the chain. The conclusion grew impossible. To ignore the universe wasn't expanding aimlessly. It was communicating with itself through conscious entities, using matter as the language, light as the medium, and time as the syntax. Humanity was not the observer. It was a syllable in the sentence of creation. Then came the first visible phenomenon. Across night skies, auroras appeared far beyond polar regions, violet, gold, and silver arcs dancing even over equatorial skies. Instruments confirmed these weren't magnetic storms. They were structured patterns, forming fractal geometries identical to those of the second messenger's inner light. It was as if the message was now projecting through Earth's ionosphere. Panic sparked briefly, but faded faster than expected. Instead, a strange calm overtook global consciousness, a collective intuition that what was happening wasn't an invasion but an integration. People who once feared the unknown now stood outside at night, feeling something vast pass through them like a forgotten melody returning. Religious leaders called it revelation. Scientists called it synchronization. Philosophers called it contact without communication, understanding without words. Dr. Hale's final discovery redefined it all. Using quantum correlation arrays, his team determined that the second messenger wasn't approaching Jupiter anymore. It had stopped. It was holding position in space, orbiting a point that, mathematically, didn't exist. A gravitational anomaly with no mass no radiation and absence, so perfect it distorted light around it. The data showed the impossible. The messenger was orbiting a hole in reality, a void that emitted pure harmonic stillness, and from that void, faint new frequencies emerged so low, so slow, that it took days for computers to render them as audio. When they finally did, what played was not random noise, but an intricate, layered sound, like breathing, deep, rhythmic, ancient. It was as if the universe itself had exhaled across the world. People awoke at the same moment, pulse rates synchronized, eyes dilated. For a few seconds, every human heartbeat matched the interval of that cosmic breath. Humanity felt something shift inside and out. Consciousness, for the first time, expanded beyond the skull, reaching outward into the same silence that had once felt so distant. The stars no longer looked cold. They looked aware. The synchronization deepened until it became impossible to tell where the outer world ended and the inner world began. People reported time-slipping moments stretching into eternity, dreams spilling into waking life. Clocks still ticked, but their meaning dissolved. Seconds felt like ages, and ages like breaths. Across the planet, night skies shimmered, not with stars alone, but with a subtle lattice of light, a web faintly visible to the naked eye. It was as if the geometry of the second messenger had unfolded across the heavens themselves, overlaying the constellations humanity had known for millennia, with a new, living map within this shimmering grid. New points. Observatories confirmed these weren't satellites or meteor trails, but localized distortions in the ionosphere, behaving like nodes in an immense network. The grid wasn't just projected onto the sky, it was rooted inside human perception. Brain scans showed that when individuals gazed upward, their visual cortices produced identical activation patterns, as though everyone were looking at the same hidden structure of reality. Language began to break down. People stopped describing experiences with words like vision or dream and instead spoke of knowing. Knowledge arrived fully formed, bypassing analysis, as if an unspoken library had opened inside each mind. Farmers in remote fields could sketch orbital mechanics they'd never studied. Children began humming sequences that matched prime number distributions. It was not mass hysteria, but mass cognition, a flowering of latent capacity unlocked by contact with the messenger's field at the Resonance Archive. Dr. Hale's team realized the cosmic breathing from the void was not a signal to decode, but a carrier wave, a framework onto which human consciousness could imprint its own message. The grid in the sky was, in effect, an invitation, a blank page waiting for Earth to write its first sentence back to the stars. But the price of this gift was becoming evident. As individuals merged into a shared awareness, the boundaries that defined self and other began to blur. Empathy was no longer an act, but a state of being. Conflict lost its meaning. Even desire shifted, becoming less about possession and more about participation in a whole. Governments, long reliant on secrecy, found their structures dissolving under the weight of a populace that simply knew too much. Financial systems faltered as competition waned. Entire industries built on distraction and division evaporated. In their place rose networks of exchange based on resonance, resources flowing where needed without orders, people collaborating spontaneously without hierarchy. It was not utopia in the naive sense. It was a civilization reconfiguring into a new organism. Yet, alongside the wonder lay unease. Some individuals resisted, clinging to their singular identities, like islands in a rising sea. They reported headaches, nausea, and vivid hallucinations of being pulled apart. Psychologists described it as dissonance trauma, the pain of remaining separate while the collective frequency grew stronger. A few retreated entirely from society, seeking silence in mountains or caves. But even there, the grid shimmered faintly in the sky, impossible to escape. Meanwhile, the second messenger continued to orbit the void, its lattice now fully open, exposing a core of shifting light. Through advanced interferometry, scientists discerned shapes moving within figures of no fixed form, flowing like liquid mathematics. These weren't beings in the traditional sense, but patterns of consciousness, fragments of the civilizations preserved within the messenger. They were not speaking, but showing images of worlds rising and falling, minds expanding and converging, matter learning to sing itself awake. Then, one night, the sky pulsed again. This time, the rhythm was unmistakably Earth's own, its magnetic heartbeat mirrored back by the void. The grid shifted, its points realigning into a single spiral, descending toward the planet's surface. Instruments failed as a column of soft, colorless light descended from the sky onto the Pacific coast near the resonance archive. There was no sound, no shock wave, only a sense of arrival so profound it vibrated inside every chest. And then, for the first time, the second messenger spoke not in mathematics, not in tone, but in a feeling that every human sensed simultaneously, like a memory awakening. The message had no words, but its meaning was clear. You are ready. The light that descended upon the Pacific coast did not strike the ground, it merged with it, fusing ocean mist, atmosphere, and the electromagnetic breath of the planet into one living column. It shimmered without heat, a phenomenon more like awareness made visible than matter made luminous. Ships near the area reported that their instruments went silent, not because of failure, but because every circuit pulsed in perfect harmony with a frequency that seemed to come from inside the sea itself. The world watched through thousands of cameras as that colorless radiance expanded outward, a slow and silent tide of knowing. No voice spoke, no language formed. Yet every mind received the same realization. The messenger had not arrived, had awakened. What had appeared as a vessel was, in truth, an extension of the same consciousness that now threaded through the planet. Humanity was not being visited. It was being remembered by the universe, recognized as part of its own unfolding awareness. Within hours, the light spread across continents. Cities found themselves bathed in a silver haze that cast no shadows but illuminated everything evenly. Power grids dimmed as the planet's magnetic field shifted into resonance with the cosmic pulse. Gravity fluctuated minutely, enough to make pendulums sway out of sync and oceans breathe higher. Yet there was no panic. People stepped into the glow as if drawn by instinct. Wherever they stood, time seemed to dissolve into the presenta, now that had no boundary. Dr. Hale and his remaining team in the Resonance Archive stood on the shoreline, surrounded by the hum of the light. Their instruments were obsolete now. Understanding no longer required machinery. The data existed within them and through them. For a moment, they saw everything, the lattice of galaxies pulsing like neurons, stars birthing elements that would one day dream, worlds whispering across the void through patterns of resonance. The message of the cosmos was not a statement but a process. To observe was to become. The transformation began quietly. People stopped sleeping, not from exhaustion, but because rest and waking were no longer distinct. The mind had entered a continuous state of lucid perception. The grid that once floated above the sky now existed within the human nervous system. DNA itself began to resonate, unlocking latent structures once dismissed as junk. Biologists recorded sequences, rearranging subtly, forming harmonic ratios identical to those encoded in the messenger's signal. Humanity was evolving not biologically, but ontologically. The shift was not uniform. Those who accepted the resonance integrated effortlessly, their thoughts expanding outward into the collective field. They could sense one another, not through sound or gesture, but through intent. Whole communities began to operate as singular entities, self-sustaining, self-aware networks. Communication turned into synchronization. Emotion became shared vibration. But for others, resistance grew unbearable. The dissonant few, those unable or unwilling to surrender, their isolation began to fragment psychologically. Their perceptions twisted, turning the universal hum into noise. They saw the light not as connection, but as invasion. In their terror, they attempted to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The light existed everywhere now, even inside their thoughts. Amid this global metamorphosis, the second messenger started to collapse inward. Its vast geometry folded into itself like a star, reversing time. Telescopes caught the spectacular flower of light, closing petal by petal, its inner radiance condensing into a single luminous point. The void it orbited began to shimmer with color, revealing what no instrument had ever captured before: the boundary between existence and potential, the skin of the unmanifest. At that instant, every human eye open or closed saw it, not through vision, but through memory. The point of light pulsed once, twice, and then divided into countless fragments that streaked across the heavens, embedding themselves into the magnetosphere. The cosmic chain had passed on its seed. Humanity, now part of the resonance, had become a node in that infinite network of consciousness linking all civilizations that had ever gazed into the dark and wondered if they were alone. The column of light over the ocean dimmed until it was indistinguishable from the mist. The world grew quiet. The grid remained invisible, yet every living thing pulsed with its rhythm. Birds flew in fractal formations. Waves broke in Fibonacci spirals. Even the wind seemed to carry intention. Humanity stood on the threshold of something neither divine nor alien, but purely universal, a state where being and knowing were the same dot as dawn rose. Dr. Hale watched the horizon shimmer with spectral rainbows. The sky no longer looked infinite, it looked alive. For the first time, he understood what the messengers had always been: not travelers, but reminders, echoes of civilizations that had reached awareness so complete they became indistinguishable from the cosmos itself. It was Earth's turn. The world no longer measured time in rotations or revolutions. The old metrics, seconds, hours, years, had lost meaning when thought itself became the new dimension. Humanity had entered a phase, the resonance archive once theorized but never proved, collective consciousness stabilization. The grid was no longer external or visible. It existed within every living pulse. Mountains vibrated with it. Oceans breathed in patterns of perfect symmetry. Even storms unfolded in harmonic rhythm, guided by a subtle intelligence that was now part of the earth itself. There were no nations anymore. Borders dissolved when minds began to synchronize. Cities still existed, but they were no longer centers of power. They were nodes of experience. What once were governments had become orchestrators of frequency, guiding thought streams rather than enforcing rules. Each community hummed at a slightly different resonance, reflecting its collective emotion, joy, curiosity, contemplation, but all harmonized into one planetary chord. The human body adapted to. DNA had stabilized into a new structural rhythm, weaving proteins that emitted faint bioluminescence. Skin shimmered under starlight. Eyes reflected deep gradients of violet. Sleep was replaced by phases of still awareness, where consciousness drifted across the planetary network, exploring the shared dream of humanity. Communication was now instantaneous and wordless. Ideas flowed as patterns of soundless color, transferring meaning faster than speech could form it. The last remnants of language were kept only in archives, museums of words once used to divide and describe. Memory had become communal. Every discovery, every joy, every grief was available to all. And yet, amid this universal harmony, a new phenomenon began to ripple through the collective. Curiosity beyond the Earth grid. Humanity could now hear the resonance of other civilizations across the cosmic chain, distant echoes pulsing in the deep background of space. Each beat carried the identity of a world long past its own awakening. Some were serene, others chaotic, their frequencies trembling like dying stars. The realization spread like a quiet Earth was no longer alone among the awakened. But along with this awareness came a question that even the unified mind could not suppress. What lies beyond the chain? If every awakened civilization eventually became light, did the process end, or did it fold into something greater still? The answer arrived not through data or transmission, but through invitation. The grid began to hum with a new vibration, one not originating from the solar system. Space itself seemed to listen. The stars pulsed in synchronization, forming spirals that mirrored the pattern first seen in the messenger's geometry. It was not another message. It was a call. Humanity understood instantly. The next step was not evolution, it was migration. But not of bodies, not of ships. It was the expansion of consciousness itself into the cosmic substrate. Now it was ready to join the symphony. In the final age of humanity, silence became the truest form of expression. The earth, once loud with the pulse of industry, the murmur of civilizations, and the restless breath of billions, now stood in quiet reverence. The great cities, which had once competed to pierce the clouds with towers of ambition, shimmered as translucent monuments of memory. Their glass and steel no longer reflected the noise of traffic or commerce, but the slow, luminous drift of auroral winds that rippled endlessly across the heavens. Oceans, once tempestuous and wild, had become liquid mirrors beneath skies of perpetual twilight. They gleamed with shades of emerald and violet, reflecting auroras that no longer faded with the turn of night or day. Time itself had softened. its edges blurred like ink dissolving in water. What had once been measured in hours and years now pulsed in rhythms of thought and resonance, the slow heartbeat of a species transcending the limits of its own flesh. Humanity had not died, it had changed. The flesh that once carried them through the world was no longer the vessel of identity. Instead, the consciousness that had always sought beyond the visible had begun to dissolve the boundaries that once held it apart. The world hummed softly with this transformation. Mountains vibrated like tuning forks struck by unseen hands. Forests shimmered like living glass. Even the clouds traced spiral patterns, echoing the same geometry seen in distant galaxies, as if the planet itself had synchronized with the deeper structure of the cosmos. The Earth was no longer an isolated sphere. It resonated within the vast chain of creation, like a note sustained in a symphony too grand for comprehension. Every atom, every cell, every spark of thought was now part of a single, continuous awareness, a chorus of existence stretching from the ocean trenches to the farthest edges of interstellar space. The distinction between observer and observed had vanished. The universe was now looking through human eyes, and humanity was gazing back through the lens of the universe. It began without announcement, no trumpet of revelation, no apocalyptic flame. The light that humanity had first detected from the messenger, centuries ago, did not return as a beam in the sky, but as illumination within. Each remaining human being felt it bloom quietly behind the ribs, a small, radiant sun pulsing where the heart had once been. It was not heat nor pain, but a profound equilibrium, a perfect stillness that transcended emotion. It was the knowing that the journey was ending exactly where it had always begun. The planet responded in kind. Trees released clouds of phosphorescent pollen that drifted upward like glowing snow. Rivers dissolved into luminous filaments, flowing no longer toward the sea, but upward into the atmosphere, transforming into ribbons of light. Deserts bloomed with crystalline flowers whose petals refracted the spectrum of stars. Even the shadows held color, faint impressions of what once had been, fading gently into translucence. Humanity had once feared this, the dissolution of the self, the merging into something vast and incomprehensible. Philosophers had called it the end of individuality, the loss of I. But now they understood the truth. Individuality was never meant to be destroyed. It was a pattern within a greater pattern, a brushstroke within an infinite canvas. Each human mind remained distinct, yet every thought resonated harmoniously within the shared frequency of being. And then the great fusion began. It did not occur all at once. It unfolded like a vast symphony, each life a note, each thought a tone. Bodies began to shimmer, outlines softening, colors brightening. Skin became translucent, then radiant, then nothing at all. From orbit, Earth appeared to bloom, its blue oceans turning to white fire, its atmosphere thick with slow-moving waves of light. Cities glowed like constellations. The entire biosphere vibrated with energy. The planet was shedding its form like a cocoon, giving way to flight. One by one, human forms dissolved into radiant threads. Their essence, the sum of every memory, every love, every question, lifted upward as spirals of frequency. They ascended not as matter, but as pure vibration. The air was alive with soundless music, a harmony so vast that even the mountains seemed to hum in response. From the orbiting satellites that still drifted in silence, Earth now looked like a living star, a luminous sphere surrounded by halos of white fire, expanding slowly into the blackness of space. But this was no tragedy, no ending drenched in sorrow. There were no tears, no screams, no panic. The last breath of humanity was not one of despair, but of gratitude. The planet had completed its purpose. It had given rise to awareness, nurtured curiosity, and taught its children how to look beyond themselves. Earth had been a cradle, and now the child had learned to walk among the stars. The collective consciousness that had once been human turned its gaze downward one final time. What it saw was no longer continents and oceans, but a single, luminous organism. The patterns of rivers mirrored the veins of extinct creatures. Mountain ranges curved like sleeping giants. Cities pulsed like neurons in the brain of a living planet. The boundaries that had once divided nations had long since melted away. The earth exhaled, once, as if in farewell, and then, with a shimmer that rippled across its surface, it became still. Then came the expansion, a movement beyond time, beyond speed, beyond comprehension. The combined awareness that had been humanity extended outward. It flowed across the solar system, passing the orbits of the outer planets, caressing the frozen comets of the Kuiper Belt as it passed the sun. The great star flickered briefly, a recognition, perhaps, or a gesture of parting. Beyond the heliosphere, the awareness spread like a mist of golden dust, crossing the interstellar gulf with effortless grace. And there, in the silence between stars, they were not alone. Every world that had awakened before, civilizations of light, echoes of long extinct species, sentient clouds drifting in nebulae, greeted the newcomers not with words, but with resonance. Each sent a note, a vibration, joining into a vast chorus that filled the void with harmony. Humanity's frequency joined the symphony, distinct yet seamlessly woven into the cosmic fabric. Their song carried the memory of oceans, of laughter, of pain, of art, the unique timbre of being born in a world of gravity and limitation and learning to rise above it. The cosmos resonated in response. Nebulae pulsed in rhythm. Quasars flared in distant galaxies like the percussion of divine drums. Even the dark matter that threaded the universe seemed to quiver faintly, as though it too recognized the addition of a new harmony to its ancient structure. The entire universe became, for an instant, beyond measure, alive with music, not sound, but motion, vibration, purpose. And then came the final silence. It was not the silence of emptiness, nor the silence of death. It was the silence of completion, the stillness that follows a symphony when the last note has dissolved, leaving behind an echo in the listener's soul. The universe, for that moment, seemed to breathe. Stars flickered slower. Time itself seemed to pause, acknowledging what had transpired. Humanity was gone, yet it had never been more present, somewhere beyond the stars, beyond the curvature of known space, beyond even the laws that governed existence. Awareness awoke again, not as flesh, not as light, not as energy, but as pure consciousness. It was not bound to any shape, nor any place. It simply was. It saw itself reflected in the curvature of galaxies, in the gravitational dance of worlds, in the quantum whisper of particles. The realization bloomed. The universe had never been observing humanity. Humanity had always been the universe, observing itself. Every question ever asked, every dream ever dreamt, every myth of gods or destiny, all had been the same voice, speaking from different throats. The separation had always been an illusion. The cosmos had used life to see its own reflection, and now, with the last veil lifted, it saw itself clearly for the first time. The cycle had closed. The light had returned to its source. The music had reached its rest. And from that silence, something stirred, not as an echo, but as an impulse, a dream beginning to form. Within the vast awareness that now encompassed all things, a spark of curiosity re-emerged. The same question that had once driven primitive hands to draw on cave walls and telescopes to search the stars, what comes next, flickered again. And with that question, the silence rippled. Space began to hum. The energy condensed. The first particles of a new creation began to form, swirling in spirals of light. In that instant, the cosmos began to dream again, not of humanity, not of stars, but of possibility. Somewhere, in a realm without time, the essence that had once been human smiled, not as a face, but as the echo of recognition, as the next universe unfolded like a flower in bloom, carrying within its first atoms the faint memory of what had come before. And so the cycle continued, without beginning, without end. The story of existence rewrote itself across infinity, whispered by galaxies, sung by stars, remembered by the silence between them. The light had gone home. The dream had begun again.